Hello everybody, welcome back to the first unit in People and the Environment, Geography, People and the Environment. This unit's in two parts. In the last video we had a brief introduction to some of the key themes in the organisation of the module, and in this video I just want to focus quickly on one little case study to get you thinking in a bit more detail about those introductory ideas that we talked about in the previous video. Don't forget, of course, there are additional resources on the KLE as well for you to follow up with some extra reading and so on after you've watched this final part of the video. In the last video we mentioned John Muir, and I kind of said he was a bit of a hero for me and for this module, and he is an early link, if you like, in our chain of the historical context within which we're working as we talk about topics in this module. He made the point that everything is connected, saying there when we try to pick out anything by itself we find it hitched to everything else in the universe, and that's very much what the subject matter that we're dealing with in this module is like. Everything is connected to everything else. And because of his interest in the preservation of wilderness, John Muir was very much involved in what I'm going to use as the first little case study for this module. The case study I want to give you is about the Hetch Hetchy River Valley in California, and it illustrates what's going to be a big theme in this module, the conflict between preservation and conservation when we're looking at wilderness areas or the natural environment versus what people want to do with that natural environment. And the main image on this slide is a painting of the Hetch Hetchy Valley before it was dammed controversially in the 1920s to provide a source of water for San Francisco. Now, prior to that time, the Hetch Hetchy Valley was very similar to the Yosemite Valley. It's the adjacent valley to Yosemite. It has a similar geological history, has a similar, had a very similar kind of landscape as illustrated in that painting by Albert Bierstadt. But it was dammed in the 1920s, very controversially, by a huge dam called the O'Shaughnessy Dam. The valley was drowned to create a reservoir, and that reservoir then provided water supply to San Francisco. It was controversial at the time, and it remains controversial, and there's a significant movement in play still to restore Hetch Hetchy. The idea being that you could remove the dam, drain the reservoir, re-expose the valley, and restore it to its former glory. The background to this story goes back to San Francisco right at the beginning of the 20th century, 1906. San Francisco was experiencing rapid urban growth and was facing significant water supply issues. That was brought to a head in 1906 when there was a huge earthquake and associated with that a fire that more or less demolished the city. There was a 5-day-long fire that destroyed 80% of the city, and part of the reason for that was because of poor water supply for firefighting, and that led to increased calls for an improved water supply, and it was suggested that the Hetch Hetchy River Valley could be dammed to form a reservoir. It was controversial at the time, and as I say, it remains controversial to the present day, but it went ahead. And I just wanted to give you a couple of extracts from the, let's call them conversations or discussions that went on at the time about whether this should go ahead, whether the Hetch Hetchy should be dammed up to make a reservoir, losing the valley, but providing water for San Francisco. And think of this in terms of the difference between preserving a landscape as it was versus conserving it in a utilitarian kind of way so that you can still make use of that landscape in some way. Now, John Muir, he's a chap we encountered before, the naturalist, and he said to dam Hetch Hetchy, or you may as well dam for water tanks the people's cathedrals and churches, for no holier temple has ever been consecrated by the heart of man. Nature has its own inherent value and should be preserved with little or no change other than that which occurred naturally. So that's John Muir's point. He says you can't dam up Hetch Hetchy. It's like a natural cathedral or church, and nature has its inherent value that should be preserved with little or no change other than that which occurs naturally. So he's arguing there for preservation. By contrast, we have a more utilitarian political viewpoint there from the Forest Service chief in the early 1900s, Gifford Pinchot, who said, wise utilisation of the economic resources of natural areas while retaining as far as possible the environmental integrity of the area so they might remain available to future generations. That's what he wants, conservation. So he doesn't want to completely trash it, he says. He wants to retain as far as possible the environmental integrity, but wise utilization of the economic resources of these areas. Now, the way he words it there, I'm not saying that this is the case, I'm just putting it to you as something to think about. Suppose we think about present day ideas about sustainable development. How would you fit those into what John Muir was saying, into what the Forest Service chief is saying there? Are either of those maybe coming under that heading of sustainable development, or do you need to step up now and provide a quote of your own to provide a sustainable development approach to what you might do in this situation? Well, the outcome of all that debate was that the project went ahead, and this map and a little bit of text underneath it, I'll leave you. You can pause the video and have a look at this at length if you wish and read about that. And you can also follow up the link at the top of the page there, or if you just Google this, do a Google Scholar search for this, you'll find plenty of information about the Hetchy scheme, the history of it, the impact of it, and the value of it. And that's the problem, I guess, isn't there? That there's always value and there's also impact. It's weighing those off against each other to decide what's the best course of action. And that best course of action is also going to change through time, not only in terms of what technologies are available at the point of development of these schemes, but also over the course of time, how the changing context, both technological and political and environmental, means that what might have been a good idea at one time may or may not still be a good idea later on. And also the potential for, well, say remediation, but the potential for reversing earlier decisions also changes over time. Sometimes things are very hard to reverse, but then maybe new technologies, new situations, things become easier to reverse. So there's a lot of issues to think about if you were put in the position of having to decide what to do about the Hetch Hetchy Valley. In case you don't do the follow-up research on this, just to show you roughly what we're dealing with, here's a photo of the O'Shaughnessy Dam, a bit of information about it there at the bottom of the screen that you can pause and read for yourself, and I say by all means chase up some extra reading on this. And here's an air photo of the Hetch Hetchy Valley as it is today, and the text there from the Restore Hetch Hetchy organisation saying the Hetch Hetchy Valley lies buried underwater behind the O'Shaughnessy Dam. By a large measure, it is the most significant damage ever allowed in any of our national parks. Restore Hetch Hetchy intends to undo what they call this great American mistake and return Hetch Hetchy to Yosemite National Park and all people. So there's a lot of issues going on here. It's a fantastic resource, water supply. Is it still necessary? Are there alternatives? Even if it is necessary, was this a valid approach to destroy this environment in a national park? Should we be doing something about it? Lots of arguments that you could get involved in over that. Now, amongst other things, that case study is intended just to demonstrate for you that what we might call the environmental movement is not a new thing. I mean, you can go back to the 18th and 19th century romantic artists, poets, authors, Wordsworth, Turner, Ruskin, etc. They were very much engaged in bringing the magnificence, the value, the aesthetic of the natural environment to prominence. Then in the 19th and 20th century, there were responses to the Industrial Revolution, both to aesthetic issues and also to pollution issues. For example, so in London, the smoke was such a problem that there was a Smoke Nuisance Abatement Act in 1853, which is an early example of environmental legislation. 1872, Yellowstone, the world's first national park. 1894, the National Trust established in the UK. And then I've basically skipped a whole load of stuff in the middle here that you can go and read up on yourself. There's a very substantial history and literature in that period here before we get to the UK Clean Air Act, 1956, and the 1960s, protests about nuclear power, acid rain, and so on. And then a landmark publication in 1962. If you haven't heard of Rachel Carson, and her book Silent Spring, then that is definitely something that you should go away and look up. Not saying to necessarily read the book at this stage, but at least find out about the book and be aware of Rachel Carson in your list of important environment figures from the history of these environmental issues. And that runs through that history of the environmental movement. Obviously, it moves right through to things that are going on today that I'm sure you're familiar with, and they're on the news and in the papers on a daily basis, and I know that many of you are actively involved in issues to do with that today. So the environmental movement is a really important thing today, but it isn't a new thing. It's been growing and developing and emerging over a long period. However, one thing that we're going to be talking about in this module that I'm going to say is a new thing is the idea of the Anthropocene. Again, it's a controversial idea. Personally, I don't like the use of the term, not because I don't believe that people are having such a massive effect on the planet that it's obviously worthy of important notice, but because the time at which you can define a geological era is probably not when you're right on the boundary of that era. But the Anthropocene is an important new idea, and it's an important new way of looking at the planet and the history of the planet that recognizes the importance of human activity in terms of now being sufficiently great that it has an almost geological impact on the planet. Or as it says in that book there, the history of your planet and your role in it is being rewritten to include a new chapter, a chapter in which you play a leading role. Humans have so greatly altered Earth's functioning that scientists now propose to recognize this with a new interval of geological time, the Anthropocene. So there's a lot going on in terms of this relationship between human activity and the natural environment. This module has dropped itself into the middle of a really controversial and massively important topic. So here's an exercise I'd like you to do, and for this you can pause the video, go and jot a few things down, have a chat, come back to the video later on when you've had a think about it. But what do you think, make me a list, what do you think are the biggest issues today in this broad arena of people in the environment? Is it climate change? Is it pollution? Is it whatever? What do you think? And I'm not saying there isn't a right or wrong answer to this. It isn't that I have a list of 5 and you'll score top marks if you get the same 5 as me. I imagine we'll have a different 5, and that's brilliant, that's great. What are your top 5? So just pause the video for a minute, at least a minute, and have a think and jot them down and come back to carry on the video when you've got your list of top 5 people and environment issues that are relevant to the world today. Okay, so have you paused the video, gone away, come back, and you're ready to carry on? You've got your top 5. If not, go away again, come back with your top 5. Okay, now I want you to carry on with this exercise, so you'll need to pause the video again here, probably for a little bit longer, or you can save this up and do it afterwards if you want. But for some of your chosen 5, or all of them, you've got plenty of time, for your chosen 5, try to identify the fundamental cause of the problem. So we're not looking yet for solutions necessarily, but just initially, what's the basic cause? Then once you've identified the cause, then you can think about where we would look for a solution. So for each of your top 5, or for a couple of them at least, decide whether the problem is caused by a natural process, or is that not the cause? Now, would it be a problem regardless of our economic system? So if our economic system, or our political system if you like, but if our economic system was different, would this thing still be a problem? Or even if it's a natural process, is it only becoming a problem because of our economic or political system? So what's it caused by then? Is it caused by our economic system or our political system? Or is it caused by our technological system? So you need to try to identify what the root of the problem is. Sometimes it's not going to be at all simple. There's going to be lots of different things. So try to pull out what you think are the chief drivers and controls on the problems that you've identified. When you've done that, then you can ask yourself, okay, so where do we need to intervene? Where can we look for a solution to these particular problems? Now, when you've done that for your chosen examples from your top 5, keep this in mind, because this is what you can be doing as we work our way through the whole of the module, as we're looking at issues, problems, opportunities within this relationship between people and the environment. What are the causes? What are the root controls? And where can we look for solutions, or where can we look to take advantage of opportunities? So the things that you've started to think about in doing that exercise are the kinds of things that this module is going to explore in detail. I've just put here some of the intended learning outcomes of this module. In other words, the kinds of things that we're hoping students will be able to do, things that students will know about if they work their way through this module. And the things on this list, so you can pause the video and read through it in your own time. I won't read it through for you. So pause the video, have a look at these intended learning outcomes, and think about the fact that these are things that you've now been beginning to engage with, beginning to think about, even just in this first session, thinking about some of these little exercises that I've been giving you to think about. As you move forward into the rest of the module, continue to keep these intended learning outcomes in mind. This is what we're hoping you'll be getting out of the module. So obviously, if you have this in the forefront of your mind as you're working through the module, it's more likely that you will get these outcomes, and that will obviously help you in the assessments also. So that was only a short case study. I just wanted really to get you thinking a little bit more about some of the issues that we raised in the first video, and it brings us now to the conclusion to this first unit. I hope you're going to find this module interesting and useful. I say it is a flagship module, central to what we do in a lot of our programs. In order to do well in it, it's important that you do follow up the online resources. There's lots of material available for you. You could just rush through it, watch the videos, not do the reading and think you've got through the course. That's not the point. It isn't a race. The resources are put there to get you started, to get you thinking, to give you ideas, to motivate you, I hope, to go and do some independent reading, some independent research of your own. And that is a really important part of the module. So after each unit, or as you're working through each unit, just make sure that you've taken some notes, you've identified what you think are the key points, things you didn't know about previously, jot them down, and then go and follow that up with some further reading. So I mentioned a bunch of people and a bunch of books and a bunch of ideas today. Some of them you might have already known about, some of them maybe you didn't know about. Well, go away and look them up and just find out a little bit more about those, and add your growing personal expertise to the basic lecture material that you're getting out of the resources online in these sessions and in the live sessions that we're having on Microsoft Teams. So that brings us to the end of this first unit, this first introductory unit. Next time in Unit 2, I'm going to be talking about the coursework assessments, the assignments for this module, the end of module short answer workbook, and the literature review essay assignment. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'll talk to you again next time. Thanks very much.